Welcome to this discussion about honeybees as an agricultural input. While their contribution to farming in the U.S. is often underestimated by the public, honeybees are an essential agricultural input. However, commercial beekeepers are facing colony collapse disorder that is causing a change in American trade for honeybees. Bees live in colonies and build hives where each bee takes on a particular role. They have survived on Earth for over 50 million years, with over 20,000 species in existence today. Honeybee populations have declined by over half in the last 70 years. While honeybees are traditionally used in United States commercial agriculture to pollinate crops, other bee species could also be used for this task. The first recognition of the decreasing bee populations was in the 1990s. Researchers investigating this problem coined the phrase colony collapse disorder in 2006. While there are many possible causes, such as monocultures, or only one crop being grown over a vast area of land, pesticides, and a virus specific to honeybees, the true cause is unknown, and most experts suspect that it is a combination of factors causing the sharp decline. The main pesticides in question are called neonicotinoids. These have been banned in the European Union, but the USDA will not ban them until sufficient evidence exists that they are causing colony collapse disorder. 1/3 of the food grown in the U.S. is dependent on pollination from honeybees, which amounts to the economic impact of $15 billion. Unfortunately, pollination is required for healthy foods, such as apples, almonds, and pumpkins. Colony collapse disorder may have raised their prices if foreign trade for honeybees had not begun. In the past, commercial beekeepers in the U.S. had substantial colonies and could supply enough bees to farmers in America. Now, many beekeepers in the U.S. are going out of business, but can attempt to salvage their colonies. Although the method is expensive, splitting colonies into 2 or 3 hives to limit the effects of colony collapse disorder will allow beekeepers to optimize their remaining colonies. Within the U.S., there is a great deal of cross-country trade for honeybees, but with less American bees, some farmers have turned to importing bees from Australia. This is an input-response curve for a single farm in California that shows how the input of honeybees affects the output of almonds, a crop that requires pollination. The orange line is the input-response curve. Any point below the curve is inefficient, while any point above the curve is impossible at the current level of resources being used. At the beginning of the curve, near an input of 0, there are only small additions to output. As the number of bees used increases, the marginal return of almonds begins to increase at a faster rate because there are now more pollinators in the fields. Eventually, there are so many bees in the field that all of the flowers have been pollinated, and the output of almonds remains relatively constant in a plateau. An optimizing farmer would seek to be at the point just before the plateau, where the highest outputs are produced with the least amount of inputs. This is where the blue profit line, profit 1, which represents the initial profits before colony collapse disorder, touches the input-response curve. As the price of honeybees increased, the curve rotated to the steeper slope of the green profit line. At the green level of profit, the number of bees purchased decreased, which lowered the number of plants that could be pollinated and resulted in the decreased quantity of almonds produced. Farmers who are seeking to optimize would begin to purchase bees from other countries at lower prices to decrease the cost of their inputs and maximize their outputs and profit in an attempt to regain the point labeled with the yellow star. This figure depicts supply and demand characteristics for the honeybee market before foreign trade was a factor. As more colonies collapsed in the U.S., bees became less abundant, and the supply decreased as shown in the shift of supply curve 1 to supply curve 2. The quantity of bees purchased decreased from about 700,000 to about 450,000 as the price rose from PA1 to PA2. Equilibrium began at the yellow circle, but moved up to the yellow triangle. So this graph is showing that without trade, the price of honeybees would have increased a great deal. This graph incorporates international trade of Australian bees, which has recently become a factor in the market. The world price, which is labeled as PW on the graph in dark green, was less than PA2. PA2 represented the price at the new equilibrium without trade. Naturally, farmers in the U.S. purchased bees from Australia because they were selling at a lower price, which created the quantity of imports totaling about 300,000 bee colonies. This brought farmers closer to the original relative quantity demanded before colony collapse disorder. The point of equilibrium changed from the circle, which was a market without trade and without colony collapse disorder, to the triangle, which resulted from colony collapse disorder but no trade, and finally to the star, which is a market where colony collapse disorder exists in the U.S., but foreign trade has begun. The main point of this graph is that with trade, the price did not rise as much, and imports became desirable. When foreign trade is added to the supply and demand for California almonds, a change in the amount of almonds exported can be seen. Since the world price, or PW, is still higher than PA2, California can continue to export almonds. The original exports can be seen as the value of Q2 minus Q1, shown in orange, and labeled as the original quantity exported. The new amount of exports is shown by Q3 minus Q1, which is labeled as the new quantity exported in light green. In reality, this change is relatively small. Optimizing almond farmers in California are still obtaining bees through imports, as shown earlier, which is preventing a sharp decrease in the supply of almonds. Consumption of almonds in the U.S. is shown by Q1, which did not change because the world price did not change. Therefore, consumers did not need to change their behavior in order to optimize, as would be the case if there was no trade in the market. However, it is important to remember that honeybees are not the only input required to grow almonds. Other factors, such as the availability and cost of labor, machinery, and fuel prices, as examples, will also impact the price of almonds. All of these factors are held constant for the graphs that were shown. This figure shows the supply and demand for almonds in California under autarky conditions, or in other words, without trade. California produces about 70% of the world's almonds, but their supply decreased in proportion to the supply of honeybees. Without foreign trade, this change would have resulted in a price increase from PA1 to PA2 and a decreased quantity demanded from Q1 down to Q2. At the higher price, a higher willingness to pay is required, so less consumers would be in the market for almonds at the new equilibrium point, represented on the graph by a yellow triangle. Those with a lower willingness to pay would see less utility in almonds and would begin to substitute other goods for almonds in an attempt to optimize their spending. When attempting to make the most profit with their resources, beekeepers in the U.S. are salvaging the colonies that remain, and farmers are importing bees from Australia at lower prices. Consumers have not yet felt the impacts due to the high world price for almonds. The new equilibrium for the honeybee market, now that foreign trade has begun, is a slightly smaller quantity demanded and a price that matches the world price for honeybees. Both the change in honeybee imports and the change in almond exports are small, but have the potential to increase if colony collapse disorder continues.